What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel, and it's time to give you my 2023 top 10 running backs heading into the 2023 college football season. A couple days ago, I gave you the top 10 quarterbacks heading into the 2023 season. Those 10 quarterbacks that I gave you probably have a potential chance to be a Heisman contender or maybe have a really good season. Now we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to do the opposite here with the running backs. We're going to give you the top 10 running backs that had pretty good seasons last year and maybe have really high expectations heading into the 2023 season. And these running backs could be serious Heisman contenders heading into next year besides quarterbacks. And we'll probably do the same thing with, the quarterbacks and then the running backs. And we'll probably do the wide receivers next. If you want to see a top 10 wide receivers video, let me down in the comments below. And also any other positions here out on the football field, because we're trying to get some more off-season content before we head into those predictions in the month of May for each and every single team. But let's get right into it here with my top 10 running backs heading into the 2023 college football season. We'll start with number 10. We got Frank Gore Jr., running back out of Southern Miss. You look at his stats from last year, had 9 rushing touchdowns and over 1,000 yards at 382 yards. Yeah, he's one of the top, running backs in the group of 5 teams, maybe one of the top, group of 5 running backs in the country perhaps as well. Frank Gore Jr.'s had a pretty good career at Southern Miss. He's rushed, over, he's definitely a Hall of Fame running back. He didn't really have the best season last year, but he rushed the football pretty well. He probably could have gotten in the end zone more times this year, but Frank Gore Jr. is definitely a guy that to watch out for. Not in the Heisman contender watch, but he's definitely in one of those top 10 running backs heading into next year. And I would say these are all for Power 5 running backs, but I'm going to say that Frank Gore Jr. does belong on this list here. He's from Southern Miss, so I'm going to say that he is a top 10 running back heading into next year for this Southern Miss team. And like I said, he's probably one of the best running backs coming out of the group of 5 teams as well. So Frank Gore Jr. is my number 10 running back heading into next year. Moving on to number 9, we got Donovan Edwards of Michigan. Looking at his stats from last year, of course, he replaced Blake Corum after an injury. He had 7 rushing touchdowns and 991 yards on the ground. Almost 1,000 yards last year for Donovan Edwards. I think he's definitely one of the best backup running backs, right behind Blake Corum. But you never know. He could probably beat him out for that starting job, maybe as the first-string running back after what he did from last year. But Donovan Edwards is a guy that you don't want to sleep on in 2023. He almost rushed the 1,000-yard mark. I think he's going to reach that number this year, perhaps. We could probably see 2 Michigan running backs reach the 1,000-yard markers, but depending on how they play them and stuff in the season. But Donovan Edwards had a pretty good season last year. I think you definitely don't want to sleep on him this year. He had 7 rushing touchdowns and about 991 yards on the ground, so he was very close to that 1,000-yard marker, and I think he can get up there this year perhaps with all those top running backs in the conference as well. So Donovan Edwards, my number 9 running back heading into next year. Number 8 is going to be Miyan Williams, running back of Ohio State. Looking at his stats from last year before he got injured, he had 14 rushing touchdowns and 825 yards on the ground. Yeah, he had a really fantastic season last year. A really good season last year for Miyan Williams. And I'm not too concerned about Ohio State's running game this year. I think Miyan Williams can really run the table for this Ohio State running game. They got some other talented running backs besides Williams, but I think Miyan Williams definitely is a future first-round pick perhaps, maybe second round, maybe third round perhaps, whoever will take him in the future for the NFL. But it's about college football this year. He had a really talented season last year. I think those touchdown numbers can probably go up this year. Maybe they will be a little bit lesser, but I think he's definitely going to get to 1,000 yards on this season. There's no question about it. He's a big tailback. He can break tackles, and I think he can really do what he can on the football field. So Miyan Williams, the running back for Ohio State, again, 14 rushing touchdowns and 825 yards last year in 2022. He's my number 8 running back heading into 2023. Number 7 is going to be Nicholas Singleton. What a freshman season he had last year from Penn State. He had 12 rushing touchdowns and over 1,000 yards on the ground. Probably one of the top, freshman running backs from last year in the Big Ten. Obviously, because he had all the yards that he had and, of course, the touchdowns that he had. He wasn't the top running back, though, in the Big Ten, but he was definitely the top freshman running back from last year's season at Penn State. And he has a great career ahead of him. He had a really good season in 2022 in his freshman season with 12 rushing touchdowns and 1,000 yards on the ground. I think he definitely deserves to be in this top 10 list. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 5 running back perhaps, though, because there's a lot of really great tailbacks out there that are probably better than him. But Nicholas Singleton is definitely a guy that you don't want to sleep on in 2023. He's definitely a really good runner. He can really run the table. It comes down to his offensive line. Can his offensive line block for him? That's going to be the question. But Nicholas Singleton with a pretty good freshman season last year. That's how he ends up here in this top 10 running back list. Let's now go to number 6. Number 6 is going to be Trey Benson of Florida State. Looking at his season from last year, he had 9 touchdowns and 990 yards on the ground. But maybe you're probably thinking, how is he on this top 10 list with those kind of stats? Well, it's because Florida State's going to have a pretty good team this year, and I kind of expect Trey Benson to be a 1,000-yard rusher this year and perhaps be a Heisman contender. I think Trey Benson's going to have a pretty good season this year. He probably will be one of those top running backs in the ACC this year. I think he's really going to be capable of running the table for this Florida State running game as well. Florida State does have a lot of great tailbacks, but Trey Benson, I think, is the best one out of them. He's got 9 rushing touchdowns from last year, 990 yards on the ground. I think he's definitely a 1,000-yard rusher this year as well coming up this season. Yeah, Trey Benson is definitely a guy that you don't want to sleep on here. If you're a Florida State fan, or also any other fan of a college football team or maybe other team in the ACC, I think he's definitely the top running back heading into next year in the ACC conference. So Trey Benson here at number 6 here on this top 10 countdown. We go to number 5 now, and you'll probably see these numbers get a little bit higher for some of these running backs from last year. And, in the top 5 here, I think these are all the running backs that have the best chance to win the Heisman Trophy heading into 2023. So we'll start with number 5. Number 5 is going to be Braelon Allen of Wisconsin. Look at his numbers from last year. 11 rushing touchdowns and about 1,242 yards last year on the ground. What a really good season he had last year at Wisconsin. And this year with Luke Fickell coming in, I think he definitely could be a more talented running back. He could probably be one of those top 10 running backs heading in the Big Ten next year, maybe one of those top running backs in the Big Ten heading into next season. But like I said, there's a lot of Big Ten running backs on this top 10 list that are going to be really good this year. But Braelon Allen is definitely in that conversation for the Heisman. I think he's definitely going to have a really good season this year. I think he'll definitely, he probably get those yards on the ground a lot more higher this season. And he'll definitely get those rushing touchdowns up as well. He's a big tailback. He can run the football. He can really break tackles as well. And whoever takes him in the NFL draft in the future, I think they're going to like this kid. So Braelon Allen is a Heisman contender. He's a serious Heisman contender and definitely a serious top running back heading into next year's season. And like I said, with Luke Fickell coming in, that could really help him out. So I think Wisconsin definitely has a top running back heading into next year, and that's Braelon Allen. Let's now go to number 4. Number 4 is going to be Bucky Irving of Oregon. The running back from Oregon, he had 5 rushing touchdowns last year and 1,000 yards. And maybe you're probably thinking, how is he on this list? Well, Bucky Irving had a pretty good season last year. Yes, he only had 5 touchdowns, but he was the backup tailback, so that's the reason why he's on this top 10 list. I think he's one of the top running backs, maybe the top, backup running backs heading into the Pac-12 next year. I think he's definitely one of those top, running backs, though, heading into the Pac-12 next year as well. I don't think there's any other Pac-12 running back that can really do damage, perhaps, but I think there's definitely an opportunity for Bucky Irving to have a really good season in the Pac-12 and also be a Heisman contender, perhaps. I think he definitely deserves to be on this list. He's got speed. He's got really good, speed about him. He can catch the football as well. So Bucky Irving's going to have a pretty good season, in my opinion. And again, his stats from last year, 5 touchdowns and 1,000 yards of rushing. Those are not bad stats at all. The touchdowns are not bad at all, but, maybe that touchdown number will go up this year to maybe in the double digits, and those 1,000 yards will continue to rise up as well. So Bucky Irving, my number 4 running back heading into next year. Let's now go to number 3. Number 3 is going to be Raheim Sanders, Arkansas running back here. Look at his stats from last year. 10 rushing touchdowns and about 1,443 yards from last season. Yeah, Sanders had a pretty good season last year for Arkansas. He's definitely not one of the top running backs in the SEC, but he's definitely right there in that top 5 category for the SEC running backs. There's going to be another SEC running back here in just a minute, but yeah, I mean, Raheim Sanders had a pretty good season. He had 10 rushing touchdowns and over 1,400 yards on the ground, so yeah, Sanders is going to have a pretty good season this year. I could definitely see him being a Heisman contender perhaps, and definitely being one of the top running backs in the SEC next year. But like I said, there's another running back on here that is just a little bit better than Sanders, who had pretty good numbers last year, and that brings me to my number 2 running back. And that's going to be Quinshon Judkins of Ole Miss, how you pronounce his last name there. He had a pretty good season last year. Look at these numbers: 16 rushing touchdowns and over 1,567 yards on the ground. What a season he had last year for Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss does have the offense to really run the football pretty well, and you got Quinshon here that can run the football pretty well, and I think he's going to have a really, really good season this year. He's definitely a Heisman contender in my, opinion. I think he's definitely one of the top running backs heading into next year's season for the SEC conference. There are other, top 5 running backs out there in the SEC, but nobody other than Quinshon Judkins. How do you pronounce his last name there? But I think he's definitely one of the top running backs heading into next year. Definitely the top running back heading into next year in the SEC conference. I mean, just look at his stats. Like I said, 16 rushing touchdowns and about 1,567 yards on the ground from last year. I mean, I think people will agree with this, that he's definitely one of the top running backs heading into next year. So Quinshon Judkins is number 2 here on this list. But the number 1 running back heading into next year is obviously no surprise. You maybe think it is a surprise perhaps, but it's none other than Blake Corum, running back of Michigan. What a dominant season he had last year. Definitely was a Heisman contender, last year. I don't know how he was not in the finals, the top 3 perhaps in the Heisman Trophy list. He had 18 rushing touchdowns and about 1,463 yards on the ground. Definitely one of the top running backs in the Big Ten Conference last season, and definitely one of the top running backs in the country last season as well. Besides, my number 2 running back that we just talked about a moment ago with Quinshon, but I think Blake Corum is going to have a pretty good season. And I think if Michigan had him, if Blake Corum would have stayed healthy, I think Michigan probably could have won the national championship last year. I'm really being honest with that. I think, if Blake Corum did play in the national championship game last year and also in the semifinal, I think, Michigan probably could have won the national championship. But this is going to be a really good season for Blake Corum. It's kind of like a redemption year. Maybe it's his year to win the Heisman Trophy and maybe be one of those top running backs in the Big Ten this season as well. And Michigan's got the talent to do that. They got the talented offensive linemen to do that. I mean, to give Blake Corum, plenty of room to run the football. But there's definitely a lot of, Big Ten running backs here on this top 10 list that can have a really good season. But Blake Corum is definitely one of the top running backs heading into next year for me, heading into 2023. And those are my top 10 running backs heading into the 2023 college football season. And again, let me guys know what you think about these top 10 running backs down in the comments below. Who do you think? Which one of these 10 running backs do you see winning the Heisman Trophy, this season? Or do you think there'll be a Heisman contender perhaps? But again, if you want to see more top 10, videos about, the positions and also give you the players that are, heading into 2023, let me know down in the comments below. And stay tuned here for more sports content on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.